Today I'm here with Amir Ullah, and we will be discussing the social and economic status of Muslims in India. So first, Professor Khan, I would like to say thank you for speaking with me today.
Thank you.
And could you first give me a little background on yourself?
I'm a professor of economics, and I've worked across the country, more often in Delhi, and moved back to Hyderabad recently. But I am, in that sense, I'm familiar with the country. Over the last 10 years or so, I've been focusing on work regarding the Muslims in India. This starts off because in 2005, the Prime Minister had set up a group of academics to actually look at and measure the socio-economic situation of Muslims in India. This was led by somebody called Justice Rajendra Sachar, and therefore that report is called the Sachar Committee report. And the Sachar Committee report is the font of all data that you would want on the Muslim situation. That report was submitted to the Prime Minister in 2006. In 2013, he called a few of us, which included me, and said that it's been 8 years since the Sachar report. And I want now to commission people who can go and check if anything has changed. That is my initiation into the Muslim issue. So I went and with the other group of people, we produced what is known as the Post-Sachar Evaluation Committee. So that's what I did across the country. We studied various states, what is happening with the Muslim situation. 2014 happened when India moved from being a left of center country to a right of center country, from being a religiously secular country to being a Hindu majority Indian country. So all those things happened. I came back to Hyderabad, and in Hyderabad, the chief minister, the governor here is called the chief minister. He set up a committee to see how Muslims in Telangana are doing, and I was a member of that committee, and we wrote that report, which talks about the socio-economic conditions of Muslims in Telangana. So that's to show you that I'm slightly credible.
Thank you so much. Okay, so how many generations of your family has lived in Hyderabad, and where did your family originally come from, and who brought them?
I'm a first generation.
Okay.
My parents come from the interiors of Uttar Pradesh, which literally translates into Northern Territory. It's the northernmost state in India. It's the largest. It's 200 million people in one state. In terms of countries, it would be the 6th largest country in the world. And 40 million of those are Muslims.
Okay.
It's a very poor state. The per capita incomes are very, very poor. They will be, the per capita income in UP would be $500 a month.
Wow. Okay. And did the partition...
$500 a year. Yeah.
Did the partition of India affect your family in any way? And did you have any family that left for Pakistan? Why did they leave? And do you think that they're better off in Pakistan than they would have been here?
Yes. Almost my entire paternal family, what in Urdu is called a dadiyal, is in Pakistan. So all of dad's cousins, relatives, including his father. So my grandmother and my grandfather, my dada and dadi, they actually split on political ground. So they had an argument in 1947. Dad said granddad said, I want to go to this new Muslim country. Grandmom said, no, I will live here. They had no other difference, right? So he went, and he was in the police, so he joined the Pakistan police. Grandmom died a year later. The local commissioner of police came to visit these two kids, one of whom was my dad, and asked them that, now your mom is no more. You want to join your dad? So my dad was 11 years old, said, no, mom has said that this is my country. So he didn't go. And so we never saw our granddad. I went to his grave many years later. So yes, several people moved to Pakistan.
Mm-hmm.
Quite a few of them live there. I meet them very often. I used to go very regularly. Uh, are they better off? That's a tough question. I'll break it down. They were definitely better off till about the 80s.
Okay.
Then Pakistan went the religious route, and it became the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, and a country that was moving up dramatically in terms of per capita GDP, investment, started nosediving, and that a very very vibrant education system. The University of Lahore was one of the better universities in this part of the world. All of them crumbled. And in the next 20 years, Pakistan went from being a very fast growing emerging economy to one of the most miserable places on earth right now. India, exactly at that same time, opened up, became a globalized economy, and started zooming. From acute poverty, India in the 90s and the next decade became among the fastest growing economies in the world. And then India did the same thing that Pakistan did. And now India is a Hindu country. So I don't know who's better off.
Okay. I want to ask you about the anti-Muslim sentiment in India. And during your lifetime, have you seen the relationship between the Muslim minority and other Indians change at all in Hyderabad or in India more broadly? For example, have Muslims become more separated and isolated from the rest of society?
Yeah, this is again, it's not a difficult question, but it's a very nuanced question. And the irony is that what is true for Hyderabad is simply not true for India and vice versa. So when we were growing up in Hyderabad in the 70s and 80s, there was a very strong anti-Muslim sentiment. There would be riots, racial, communal. In India, race is community, race is religious community. We don't have colored races. So the Muslim-Hindu rioting and fighting and murder would happen very regularly. Through the decade, it started in 1969 with one incident, and then it goes on till about 1992. In this 25-year period, there is great animosity. Riots everywhere, daylight murders, and it was a very difficult situation. During that time, you will see a lot of Muslim migration happening to the Gulf, primarily, also to the United States. But then in 1992, something happened, and everything became wonderful. 30 years now, and there is no problem. Everybody lives together. Muslims and Hindus' economic relations are very stable. There are mixed localities almost everywhere, and you haven't seen a communal riot even after the BJP comes to power in 2014. And the Hindu majoritarian communal party like a BJP can never win in Hyderabad. Even this election that happened a few months ago, they didn't win a single place. They won a small little. They had a 13% vote share, but couldn't. Whereas exactly the opposite happened in India, where from 92 onwards, which is significant because that is when this Babri Masjid came down. Since then, there has been rioting. There were riots earlier too, but that scale went up, and Gujarat became the central point of that entire problem, and then it spread. And over the last 10 years, it has been pretty bad.
Okay. Some argue that anti-Muslim rhetoric is just election-related propaganda and that it does not represent most Indians. Do you believe this to be true?
This is not what I believe. This is what I read. I'm not a social scientist in that sense. I'm a pure economist. So for me, the understanding of the political structure, social structure is second hand. There are scholars who argue that the Hindu-Muslim tension is centuries old. And they argue that this goes back 3 centuries ago, when Muslim rule got solidified all over the country, and the fault lines that came up were in terms of what they ate. The meat became a big issue. Marriages, so if Muslim kings married Hindu women, then that became a serious issue. Temples, there is this argument that temples were broken down and mosques came up. So there is a simmering issue for the last 300 years. But that was, subsumed under a culture that was very syncretic and a culture that was inclusive. And it really didn't matter. Everybody spoke Urdu at one time. Everybody moved to English. But over the last 30 years particularly, and one doesn't know why 30 years, there has been a definite shift in India's majoritarian thought that the Hindu vote has got consolidated more than ever before. And that is where it became a political tool. So the answer I'm giving you is yes and no, in the sense that yes, it makes great political sense to speak against the Muslim, just as it makes great political sense for Donald Trump to speak against the Muslim or Rishi Sunak to speak against the immigrant. Similarly, in India, it makes sense to speak. Then you consolidate 80% of the vote, which is what the Prime Minister does and does very well. On the other hand, if you really see India's racial fault lines, the Muslims in India, while they are in a bad shape in some states, otherwise they are pretty okay. Like in Telangana, you don't see any tension, or in Karnataka today. But Karnataka a year ago was very bad.
Okay.
Tamil Nadu, Kerala, West Bengal, you don't see any issue. But today, if you go to Uttar Pradesh, you do see a Muslim who's scared. If you go to Madhya Pradesh, you do see a scared Muslim. So it has a lot to do with the current political movements. But essentially, India remains a secular country. And some of us believe that we are one election away from going back to where we were.
Yeah. So has anti-Muslim sentiment affected you or your family in any way, like personally? And as a Muslim, do you feel at home in India?
That distinction is a very important distinction to make. The vertical and the horizontal separations we have in the country are a curious mixture of religion, caste and class. So the one who's most marginalized, the one who's most vulnerable, is one who's at the bottom of all of those. So you have to belong to a lower income class, you have to be a lower caste, and you have to be a different religion. And all three are necessary conditions. It is then you get victimized. People like me are very privileged. So if you ask me personally, do I feel none at all? I'm very happy. I get invited everywhere. There is no discrimination. Worked in the government, worked in the private sector. And I might even go as far as to say that we actually benefit from that. Because, you are the little token outsider, so you get treated better. That here is one unknown specimen, so let's look at him. It's like when the Indians from Hyderabad and whatever went to California or Chicago in the 50s and 60s. People actually would come and touch them and see what it means to be brown. So you actually benefit from being that spot. Yeah. But that is really me. That is really a few of us who are privileged. for us to say that oh, nothing's wrong and therefore nothing's wrong will be very foolish. The data shows that the Muslim in India is at the receiving end, is persecuted, is marginalized, and it has happened very significantly in the last 10 years.
Okay. So since Urdu is primarily a Muslim Indian language, have you seen the decline of Urdu here in Hyderabad? In other words, do you believe that bias against Muslims is causing Muslims to lose their culture?
Urdu is not a Muslim language. Urdu stems from the coming together of the Hindu, the Rajput, the Muslim, the Marathi. So the word Urdu itself means camp. So Urdu is a language that grew in military camps, and it was looked down upon by the Muslims. The Muslim clergy and the Muslim royalty didn't care a hoot about Urdu. They spoke Persian. And therefore you will find that Urdu was a language of the poor. And where it grew, which was Delhi primarily, it was spoken by the common people and everybody. The court, the Red Fort never spoke Urdu, but the commoner outside spoke Urdu. Urdu gained legitimacy much later. It was only after the demise of Persian that Urdu becomes popular. Even now, half the Muslim population in India has no idea of Urdu. You know, see, half the population of the Muslim population in India lives in Bengal, in Assam, in Kerala, in Lakshadweep, and they are as far removed from Urdu as they are from Japanese. Whereas the other half of the Urdu speaking are people in Punjab, are people in Haryana who have nothing to do with Islam. Most of the big poets, there's a long list of poets, even today, who are non-Muslim. The tragedy that happened with Urdu was that it became associated with the Muslim. And somewhere, it's not 1947, much earlier, Urdu became a Muslim language, or was consigned to become a Muslim, and that's from where the decay starts. But even now, you see the poets we read, the writers we read, they are basically people who are non-Muslim. Hyderabad's culture was very interesting. The nobility spoke Turkish. The Nizam of Hyderabad, who just died, the last fellow, Mufaffamjah's elder brother, Muazzam, whatever his name, he never spoke. In a public address, he said that I don't know Urdu. He spoke Turkish. So Hyderabad's and in Hyderabad, the Urdu that was spoken was a very pidgin adaptation of Urdu, which contained words from various languages, and the Urdu guys never thought that was Urdu. And the Urdu literature that is written is mostly literature that comes from Delhi and Lucknow, and now from Pakistan. So, yeah, the Urdu as a language definitely is less popular than it was 50, 60 years ago. The number of schools that have been shut down, Urdu schools, is pretty significant. But the moment you stop and look at the number of Hindi schools that are closing down, Marathi schools that are closing down, or Kannadiga schools they are the same. Everybody wants to learn English.
Okay. Are there any aspects of Muslim culture that are becoming extinct in Hyderabad or in India more broadly? In relation to food or clothing or traditions?
Interesting, culture. The Muslim culture in India is very nebulous. What is Muslim culture? If you see the music, which is an essential part of culture, the Muslim music is Indian. It has nothing to do with Arab or Persian. It's all the Patiala Gharana and the Banarsi Gharana and the Jaipur Gharana, and even that, and that's the music that Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan and Mehdi Hasan sing. So Muslim music was always Indian. Language was always Indian. No Muslims spoke Arabic. Clothes, Indian Muslims wear very proudly a shalwar, thinking it is Muslim. It has nothing to do with Muslim. It's a very North Indian Punjabi dress. Men in festivities wear sherwani, which is what every Punjabi wears in his wedding, even today. So Muslim culture, which is language, food, and clothes, were essentially Indian and continue to be so. There is nothing else that I can think of. If you see Eastern UP, where a lot of Muslims live, or Bihar, they speak the language that everybody speaks there, which is some dialect of Urdu and Hindi. They eat the same food, sing the same songs. So Muslims in India were never a cultural entity. They were always a religious entity. And that remains. And that number has only gone up.
Okay. So the city of Hyderabad has a very rich culture and history of Muslim heritage. Has the city been able to preserve Muslim historical sites, do you think? Muslim historical sites?
Yeah. So Hyderabad that way has been very lucky. Hyderabad's historical sites, and it's very interesting you ask this question, that in Hyderabad the historical sites have nothing to do with Islam. The most popular and the most identifiable cultural icon of Hyderabad is the Charminar. You've seen? What is a Charminar? It's an empty building. It has 4 minarets. It's not a mosque. It's not a mausoleum. It's not at somebody's tomb. It was just a building constructed because there was drought at that time and the Nizam wanted to give wages to some labor. So the Golconda Fort, it has nothing to do with Muslim heritage. It's among if you haven't seen it, you should. It's the oldest clay fort in the world. And it was constructed much before the Muslims came. They just took it over and continued with it. The only the real Muslim historical site that I can think of is the Makkah Masjid, which is 100 and something years old. But otherwise, you will find that in Hyderabad's buildings and whatever have very little to do with Islam.
Okay. And there's a part of Hyderabad known as the Old City, and most of the people who live there are Muslim. Has the Old City changed over the years, and why do you think it's changed, if it has?
So Hyderabad has this river that flows right across. It's called the Musi River. It's a small tributary of another big river called the Krishna. It used to be a proper good river 100 years ago. Water used to flow, and we actually had a flood in 1908. Now it's a little stream of water that flows because the water flow has been capped at the upper end. South of that river is where Hyderabad was set up 400 years ago. So that part of Hyderabad is predominantly Muslim. It is not that it's only Muslim. Right? Even now, about half the population is non-Muslim. Half the population is Muslim. The reason Old City is associated with Muslims is most of Muslims live there. It's not that only Muslims live there. On the north of the river, very few Muslims live, which is where we are right now. Right? So here you will have a dot or two of Muslims. About 75% of Hyderabad Muslims, which will be roughly 3 million people live south of that river. So that's what is called old. It's not really an old city. It is 1600. In the history of the world, 400 years it means nothing, but it's relatively old. And that is where, as I said, half the population is Muslim.
Okay. And in addition to social discrimination, I've heard that Muslims in India face many economic hardships. Do you feel that you have lost economic opportunities because you're Muslim? If so, why do you think this is happening?
Same answer. I haven't. But does it mean that Muslims haven't? You bet they have. There are built-in systems now that discriminate, which wasn't the case earlier. There is outright discrimination against Muslim shopkeepers and house hunters and Muslim landlords. So yes, it has a profound impact on the Muslim economy.
Okay. And has life generally changed for Muslims in Hyderabad from the time you were younger? Are Muslims holding the same jobs today that they held before or not?
Hyderabad is an oasis of hope in India. So the Muslim in Hyderabad is much better off than the Muslim in Hyderabad was 50 years ago.
Okay.
The Muslim in Kanpur is worse off. The Muslim in Delhi is worse off. But in Hyderabad, the average Muslim poverty has reduced. The average Muslim educational achievement has gone up. The number of schools have opened up. There is a considerable Muslim population that works for the IT sector in terms of writing code, writing software, and in terms of ancillary services that it provides. Hyderabad real estate has gone up, so everybody's become better off. In that sense, Hyderabad has changed.
Okay, so I know you mentioned education in that answer, and do you think the level of Muslims versus non-Muslims education, is there like a discrepancy between the two? And do you think the economic status of Muslims is related to education?
There is no comparison. It's really yin and yang. It's really, So the numbers are that almost everybody in India goes to school, Hindu or Muslim. So if you see the primary school, everybody goes to school.
Okay.
As they come to middle school, about a third of them drop out.
Okay.
Again, it's secular. It's Hindu and Muslim both. As they go to high school, that's when you find the Muslims disappearing.
Okay.
The Muslim population in high school is about 60% of what it was when it began. And by the time you come to college, they've all disappeared. It's just about 5% that is left in college. Whereas the non-Muslim, 20% is left. So is education in India encouraging people to drop out of school? It is, and every Indian. But relatively, the Muslim population falls off much faster. Only 5% reach higher education, whereas the non-Muslim population, 20% reach higher education, which is not great. The US is 65% go to higher education. All of Scandinavia, 72% go. Here, 75% do not go to higher education.
Yeah. Why do you think that is for Muslims?
Yeah. So what happens is that, firstly, the quality of education is terrible. I'm a teacher, so I'm saying that for my own tribe. We have pretty bad schools and pretty bad teachers. Our expenditure on education is very low. We have very few schools. We have, and it's a pyramid. So we have 100 schools that take primary students. We have 50 for middle school, which means 50% children have to drop out, and we have 20 high schools. So. And in Muslim populations or in Muslim areas, there are very few high schools. So the Muslim boy or the Muslim girl has to walk 5 miles to go to school. And in areas in UP and Bihar and Assam where there is no option but to walk, there is no road or there is no bus, then the dropout is much higher. Has that resulted in... is that the reason for economic deprivation? Not really. Because unlike in the developed world, education and livelihood is not as strongly correlated in the poor parts of the world as it is in the richer parts of the world. See, in the upper middle income countries or higher middle income or high income countries, the ones you come from, education has a direct correlation with incomes.
Yeah.
In countries like ours, education has a very distant relation with livelihoods for a variety of reasons. One is that you go to college. It's usually a very poor college. You learn nothing, and therefore you don't get a job. Secondly, the level of industrial activity is such that there are no jobs in the country. India needs 11 million jobs, 11 million new jobs every year. But because the industry is in a very nascent situation, we produce 100,000 jobs. So if you have 11 million people graduating, you have 100,000 jobs. What's the rest of the 10 million going to do?
Yeah.
So they just are unemployed. That gives even more less incentive for people to study. So education by itself is not a way out, a way out of poverty. It's a way out of other things. You become better and you learn more and you become a better citizen. But it's not a guarantee to ending poverty.
Okay.
It does not get you a job.
Okay. And are there any concrete steps that can be taken to address anti-Muslim sentiment in India, do you think?
Yeah. This picture at the moment is very dismal. Concrete steps, I must stick my neck out and say, there are none within the country. Because we are a very, one of the biggest strengths that India possesses is that it is a very fiercely democratic country. And it will remain so. And when 80% of the population is voting in a particular manner, there is nothing you can do in a democracy that will reverse that situation. Today, if India has to get back, if India has to recover some of its earlier traditions of respect, diversity, it has to be outside pressure. The US has to stop supporting India's right-wing movement. The US has to stop supporting the Prime Minister. Saudi Arabia has to put pressure. Libya has to put pressure. Kuwait has to put pressure. Not give them special awards and say that you're doing well and you're the most glorious person. It will come when external pressure comes.
Okay. And my last question, if you could change anything in India now, what would it be and why?
The Prime Minister.
Okay.
Because I honestly believe that much of India's... the reason I'm saying that is that India is a very, very vertically divided structure. That's why the caste system exists very strongly in India. And India is very patriarchal and now very tends to respect and believe in authoritarianism. And it has a perfect person there who is patriarchal, who is misogynist, who is who's autocratic, and who knows what the lowest common denominator wants. The moment that top changes, the person at the top changes, the country changes.
Yeah.
We've seen that everywhere. We've seen that recently in an election in Karnataka, which is a neighboring state. It was going that way. And then you remove the person at the top, and now it's a decent state again. It happened in Germany. Hitler went away and it became a decent country. So I think that what India needs now is a change at the top, a political change at the top. It happened in 2004. We had a similar situation then. A very strong right-wing government led by a very charismatic right-wing politician called Atal Bihari Vajpayee. He lost that election. In the next 10 years were the most beautiful years that India has ever seen.
So if we change the Prime Minister, do you think that will impact the Muslims' experience in India?
Yeah, because who you replace him with will be somebody who respects India's history, India's tradition, respects the fact that there is going to be heterogeneity in the country, there should be diversity, that India's strength lies in the fact that it has all sorts of people, all sorts of religions, cultures, castes, and that they should not just be tolerated, they should be respected and they should be celebrated. That's been India's strength all along.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.